Denise Gwynn, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal. Book 3 of the Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 35. When they made the decision last night to sleep together, they'd approached it with open eyes. And they'd done so with a mutual promise that nothing long-term was happening between them. Right? After all, she'd shared with him her painful romantic history, and he got it. He could see how someone might be gun-shy about getting involved in a new relationship, especially when the old relationship had ended less than a year earlier. Not only that, but it ended under spectacularly brutal circumstances with full court press coverage. He couldn't imagine how hard that might be for someone to handle. So if she was distancing herself from him, then it was okay, right? And now she was avoiding him. Clearly, she was avoiding him. And he supposed he was kind of okay with that too, right? And then it hit him, and his heart filled with hopefulness. She was just weathering out the storm, waiting for the Velasquez family's reaction to the fact that their former daughter-in-law-to-be had inserted a chest tube into their beloved son. Yes, that was it. That was the reason why she was avoiding him. His heart surged with joy, because he had no other way to account for her absence from his life. It was as if she'd completely disappeared. He couldn't leave. Gnometown was in his blood. It was his life. He loved it here. Yes, he was a bit lonely, but he really did love it here. But he was in love with her too. He sighed and sat back. What in the world was he going to do? Phyllis knocked on his office door and peeked her head in. Mrs. Darjeeling's not feeling well, and she'd like you to take a look at her sometime in the coming week. It's not an emergency. She doesn't have to see you today, but sometime this week. Do you want me to make an appointment with her? Mrs. Darjeeling? He asked, surprised. But she changed practices. She went to Naomi's practice. Phyllis walked into his office. Well, apparently she's back. Dr. Schuster announced that she's closed her practice and she's sending everybody back to you. Are you kidding me? No, I'm afraid not. And just like that, he remembered the last hateful words that Danielle said to him when she'd finally made up her mind to leave him. I just wanted to tell you that I've applied for a position on the oncology ward at the University of Nebraska School of Medicine. Wait, I'm only just hearing of this? When did you decide? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want you to know. That's mighty unkind of you, Danielle. Well, I just decided, that's all. Hold on. Are you asking me to come with you? I mean, I'd have to close my dad's practice. I'm going on my own, Drew. You're not even giving me a chance to see if I'll come with you? Are you? I can't, Danielle. You know that. See? And that's why I'm leaving. He shook his head. He felt dizzy, lightheaded. It's not just Mrs. Darjeeling, Dr. Rutherford. Everyone's coming back. Plus, there are some new people in the community who've bought condos at the hotel and resort, and they want to establish a relationship with a family practitioner. Oh my God, Drew said, cradling his head. He stood up and walked to the window. Thank goodness the film crews had finally left. Her office window remained dark, and now he knew why. And then he realized something else. When he dropped her off 2 days earlier, she'd not attended to her patients at all. She'd begun closing up her practice. A wave of hopelessness engulfed him, and then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a slight movement in the office across the street. Wait, she was in her office. Before he had a chance to second-guess himself, he hurried across the street and did away with any niceties. He reached up and pounded on her office door. "Naomi! Naomi!" he cried. "Open the door! Please, Naomi, open the door!" Drew heard footsteps on the opposite side of the door. Then, after another moment, she opened it and peeked her head out. She'd been crying. "I really don't want to talk to you." "Is it true you're leaving Gnometown?" She bowed her head. He simply couldn't let her leave. He pushed, gently yet firmly, on the door and found himself in the front foyer of her office, the cozy waiting room where her patient sat and waited before seeing her. "Naomi, why are you leaving Gnometown?" "I can't discuss it," she said. "Honey, you can't keep running away from your problems." She gazed up at him. He was in love with her. He was in love with her in a way he'd never been in love before. He had to make the effort to get her to stay. "I don't know, Drew," she said, her chin uplifted. "I finally realized that you were right. I need to go someplace where I can challenge myself, where I can perform the kind of surgery that I'm meant to perform. After all, I came all the way up here from Los Angeles, and I can go anywhere I want to. Unlike you, you've stayed put for years, haven't you?" He reared his head back, stung. A surge of anger rippled through him. "Okay, lady," he said. "I may be in love with you, but at least I'm not a coward." Way harsh, Drew. "That's okay. I'm feeling kind of harsh right now. At least I don't leave people in the lurch. I stay and fight it through." She bowed her head and wept. It hurt what she'd said to him, but he also knew that he'd hurt her right back. Even so, he longed to wrap his arms around her, draw her into his embrace, and tell her everything would be fine, only he couldn't make that kind of a promise. Drew let a moment hang in the air between them. He longed for her to make some move, some gesture of reconciliation, for he would have lunged for her in a second, but she turned her back to him. Taking that as his final cue, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. He stomped back across the street, but he didn't return to his office. He climbed into his truck and drove out of town. He drove to the park and took off on the long hike, the 3-mile one he'd taken not 3 days earlier with her. Never again was he going to let a woman into his heart. He couldn't handle the heartache when she left.